Welcome back to another episode of Sketch Nerds, where we break down sketch comedy. What works, what doesn't work, what we like, what we don't like, and why. This week, we'll be doing a very special episode looking back at the career of the recently deceased Norm Macdonald. We'll be looking at a bunch of different sketches and just talking about his style of humor in general. As a special guest this week, from the excellent sketch comedy podcast, My First Sketch, as well as one of the brains behind Philly Sketch Fest, we have Josh Higham.
Oh, thanks guys for having me.
And also on the mic, we have our producer extraordinaire, Isaiah Hedden.
Hello.
Yeah, all right, guys. Welcome in. Nice to be recording again. Nice to see you all. Let's talk about Norm Macdonald, who tragically passed away a little while ago, who was undoubtedly a powerful force in comedy, certainly through the 90s, and the echoes of his work reverberated long after that and will continue to, I'd imagine. But let's start by talking a little bit about each of our kind of general thoughts on Norm Macdonald and his style of comedy in general, just to kind of get a baseline before we dive into the sketches. Josh, what did you think about Norm Macdonald? What was your experience with him?
So with Norm, he was, when I first started watching like Saturday Night Live and stuff, he was the update guy then. Like he was my first update guy. And I was in and out like as a 10-year-old, 11-year-old watching, and he was doing Bob Dole, which was like, looking back at it, it was oddly influential to me. Like the same way that like Will Ferrell's George Bush would be, like how the SNL like president impressions happen to be like. So Norm was like a big thing. So, and when I really started watching every week was when he started, when he basically lost his job as the update host and eventually quit the show. Like that little bit of controversy there and Colin Quinn showing up out of nowhere, like what was a little jarring, I think, for 12-year-old Josh. I was like, oh, this guy's not here anymore. Not knowing that, like, that there was a huge like firestorm behind the scenes of, executives in LA not liking him and all that stuff. But like, yeah, Norm was a nice, a real impressionable voice for young me. Now that I look back on it, for sure.
Do you feel like he influenced your style of comedy at all?
I don't know if he does, because I always see him more of a joke person, and I don't necessarily consider myself a joke person. Like if there's a joke in the story, like, but like he is one of my favorite update people when he, doing it solo. Like, there's an anarchy to his approach that I really dig.
Oh, absolutely. I love if you go back and you watch his old update clips, and there are a ton of them on YouTube. But it's really great to see how often he's going for a groan and not a laugh, or like how often he relishes in the groan, or relishes in the gasp.
Yeah.
And I think that's I think that's really great, because it kind of lends itself to doing something different. And I think the current iteration of Weekend Update has a little bit of that, with the way that, more often than not, Michael Che writing very inappropriate jokes for Colin Jost, and like that getting a gasp. But that's all like inherent to the bit. Like the bit is that we know, oh, it's a joke for Colin. What's it gonna be? But with Norm, it was really like, this is just like, you could go through an episode where it's like pretty straightforward, Weekend Update, news of the day, jokes, and then you'll get something that's totally out there and really turns it on its head.
Yeah, like, I mean, we know the idea of the whole, like, Jost and Che writing jokes for each other. And that makes me think of this joke that Norm did on Update, where it was something about, like, I forget what it was, but there was, like, some kind of pie chart. And he was like, you'll notice that the pie chart doesn't add up to, it was something about women and like, education. And, like, you'll notice that the pie chart doesn't add up to 100. That's because a woman did the math. And then that got a laugh and a groan. Just kidding. Like, oh, you think that's weird? A woman wrote that joke. Well, laugh and groan. Oh, we don't hire women. Like,
yeah.
So like the same thing. Like, but it's him.
Yeah, he was described by Jerry Seinfeld as sophisticated dumbness, and the idea being that like there is some of the jokes on their face can come across as very kind of stupid and juvenile, but if you look a little deeper, and that joke is a good example, that kind of multi-layered thing, you can see there's more going on.
Yeah.
Than that. Yeah. But Isaiah, what did you think about Norm Macdonald?
Well, I think it's a very similar story to what Josh is talking about. I mean, he was on SNL for 5 seasons, 93 to 98. And if I look back at my life, I was born in 83, so I turned 10 in 93. And I remember the snowstorms in 93 and 96. So, like, things, my memory starts to really, form a story in that time of period of time. Jurassic Park comes out. I remember birthdays. And so I remember watching Saturday Night Live. I remember watching Norm do his thing. I remember laughing at him. I remember him getting fired and being replaced. I remember him like that being an issue. Like it wasn't something I was invested in, but like the OJ trial, I remember it happening. And like it just kind of passes you by in time. And then you look back later and you're like, oh wow, that was really something at some point. And his voice, his cadence, how he speaks, kind of hits that nostalgia string for me a little bit. I think it's from that time and period. Now we talk about a lot that you find Saturday Night Live in middle school. Like when you're allowed to stay up, that's where you start. Your humor and Saturday Night Live kind of cross at that exact point in time. And I would say like the late '90s is definitely a part of that. And so for me, his voice and the way he tells jokes and the deadpanness of it all, I probably find certain things funny that I shouldn't find based off of that foundation. I wouldn't be surprised if you went back far enough. Kind of like the Simpsons of the '90s kind of really established a lot of my humor as well. It just they were just telling jokes a certain way, and it just worked. And now it's like a foundation for how I approach comedy, like under the surface.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I think I think we've talked about this not only on this show, but I know the three of us in personal conversations about the importance of those formative years of watching SNL if you end up doing comedy and the way that can influence you or who you think is like the best cast and all of that kind of thing. I think that can affect you a lot. I know for me, I was a little bit younger, so I missed Norm being on SNL. Because I was born in 91. So my kind of formative SNL memories are a little later. It's not, I'm 30, almost 31. I'm not like super young. You guys laugh like.
Everything you say from now on is meaningless. Go on.
But it just reminds me of this idea that like people always blame millennials on stuff. And I was like, you do realize that millennials are like in their 30s now. Like
millennials are 40 now.
We're full adults.
Full on adults.
Shut up. Like
no, when people blame things on millennials, they just generically mean young people.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's more Gen Z now than anything. But that's but for me, so Norm Macdonald was someone who I was kind of aware existed, but wasn't super familiar with him. My first real kind of engaging with Norm Macdonald in any meaningful way was when my college roommate, my junior year, Ben Curry, who is a great sketch writer based out of Royal Oak in Michigan. He's written for Bad Medicine before. Ben Curry was going to see him at a show in Baltimore. And apparently, I never heard exactly why, but apparently Norm Macdonald was so bad that they refunded all of the tickets.
Oh, wow.
Like he showed up and was just terrible to the point. And I can't imagine, I imagine you have to be quite awful for the venue to refund all the tickets. And so I think that kind of was like, well, who's this shithead? Not to speak ill of the dead. But, later on, I definitely absorbed, with YouTube and that kind of thing, absorbed more Norm Macdonald. And I've really had a love-hate relationship with him because I think he can really tell an amazing joke. Like he can tell a fantastic joke. But I also feel like he leans so much into what I would consider anti-humor, and I think we can talk more about if Norm Macdonald is anti-humor or not. In my perspective, he leans so much into that it's no longer subverting expectations. It's deconstructing stand-up by telling somewhat simple jokes and straightforward jokes that are still funny. But that stopped being to me, that stopped being unexpected at a certain point, and it stopped being commentary because it just started being that. And if I saw Norm Macdonald, I knew it was going to be something like the Moth Joke, which we'll talk about as well, a joke he told on Conan O'Brien, where there's a long meandering story, and then it's like he had it. Some of those Norm Macdonald jokes feel like when you're writing a sketch and you write like a really bad button, like you write a button that ends up being a pun or something like that. And it's like, this is a dumb, like groaner joke that I've put at the end of my sketch. And I know it is, but ending sketches is hard. Writing buttons is hard. So that's what I did. But we can unpack all of that as we go through the episode. Let's start by talking about some sketches or some bits. Josh, is there anything in particular that Norm Macdonald did that you want to talk about or bring up?
So the first thing, whenever I think of Norm Macdonald is, and it's such an odd sketch to pick because I don't think a ton of people have seen it because it's not readily available online. And it's a weird thing where Norm Macdonald plays the straight man. He plays the host of a game show. It's a sketch from basically it's like his second to last episode right before he quits. It's a game show called Who's More Grizzled, where Norm plays the host of the game show, and the two contestants are Garth Brooks and Robert Duvall, as old men who worked as prospectors, soldiers, like have had a hard life. So the idea of the game show is finding out which of these two guys is a more grizzled old timer.
Let's go to dead wives. The question is, life's hard, ain't it? Wayne.
Damn right it is, Sonny. I lost Adeline in childbirth 40 years ago. Every spring when the dogwoods bloom and the foals they take her first steps, I think of the way she...
I'm sorry, that's wrong. No, that wasn't grizzled. That was wistful. Mr. Mitchum, you can take a commanding lead here.
I've buried wives, but a father should never have to bury a son. It was the flood of 52. We were all caught on the levee when... I don't want to talk about this no more.
Yes!
Were they the guest? I guess it's a Saturday Night Live.
So it was Saturday Night Live, and Garth Brooks was the host. And there were a couple episodes in the late 90s where you had the host, but you also had like a guest star who I guess they didn't want to do. Like, so I know Robert Duvall did it once. I know Shaq did it once, where they just showed up for like 2 sketches in the show, and they weren't like the focal point of the show. Like,
interesting.
So it's weird to have 60-something-year-old Robert Duvall on SNL to begin with.
Yeah. Well,
he's a good actor. He shows up in things. He's one of those actors that if he's in it, it's probably good. You know what I mean? It's
right. But why is he doing SNL at 60, whatever he was at that time? Like that's the weird part to me.
Do we know who the oldest guest on SNL?
The oldest host is Betty White when they did that thing a couple years ago.
Yes, that makes 100% sense. Shout out to Betty White.
Yep. Stop trending and scaring me. So he's playing.
So what did you like about this sketch? Like what grabbed you on it?
Well, there's like, for one, there's a bit of like self-referential meta in it because the two contestants on the show very clearly do not like him as the host. And there's commentary about like, I think Garth Brooks comes out and immediately, I don't much care for you. Well, sir, not a lot of people do. Like,
yeah.
And he had already been fired off an Update. I think he appears on the show like 2 or 3 more times after Update, between Update and quitting. And it's, that wink of, yeah, people don't like me apparently. Oh, well, like was a big part of it. And it's just I'm a big fan of game show parody sketches when they're done right. And I think this is as close to my favorite rightly done game show to me. I don't know. I just love it.
Yeah, Isaiah, what'd you think?
Unfortunately, because was not originally supposed to be on the show, I did not get a chance to watch these sketches that were all listed out. This was not. I watched some of them, but I didn't watch all of them, so I did not get to see this one. But I am curious, though. Do you guys think Norm's act? Because he really does kind of play the same character in everything he does. Could he turn it off? Was that his bit? Was that a thing? Like if you were alone in an elevator, was he always acting like that? Or was this more like he could turn it up and be even more normy than Norm? Or, was there a switch? Because he really does, like you see one sketch, not that you've seen them all, but his delivery is kind of very like, and no one else could do it. So it's not like he was doing something that anyone in the cast could get up and do. Like only Norm could tell the Moth joke, maybe Chappelle, and it would still carry all the way through. So for a bit like this, where he's playing kind of a straight man in a game show, is that Norm being Norm, or is that something else?
It's a good question.
I think this is the straightest he is. Like I don't think there is, especially in this sketch, in this game show, there's no, like there might be a wink to that, persona that he has, but like outside he doesn't do much sketches once he gets update. Like he's Bob Dole for that campaign season, and he does a couple other impressions that show up, but like he's the update host. Like he doesn't do that much outside of that. So like, yeah, he just doesn't seem to be that persona in this one.
When do is the update host always head writer, or is that something new?
No.
That's something new?
That's something relatively new, yeah.
Okay, all right, I wasn't sure.
Well, and it's gone in fits and starts. So like Tina Fey was, but I don't believe Amy Poehler was when she was one of the hosts.
Seth was, but not immediately after he got it. Like it still took a couple years.
Yeah. And for me, like reflecting on it, it actually thinks so. Like when you first suggested doing this episode, I thought, why are we doing Sketch Nerds about Weekend Update? Like, because I was just unaware that he'd even done sketches outside of Weekend. I didn't know that he did sketches, and so obviously I've come to learn that, and I knew he was in like Celebrity Jeopardy, which we'll talk about later, doing the Burt Reynolds bit, but I didn't. Yeah, I remember thinking like, well, this doesn't sound like a good idea.
All right, so yes, for me, I still see him as a Saturday Night Live guy. And, if I made a top 10 of my favorite Saturday Night Live people, he would be near that list.
Which is funny because famously, after the 40th anniversary or around that time, one of the Rolling Stone writers, Rob Sheffield, made a list of a ranking of all of the cast members ever, and Norm was dead last on his list. So...
But I'm saying, like, I remember, like classic Saturday Night Live and Norm fit in my head, but he doesn't really have like that, Target Lady sketch or something that you really, really know him for besides the Jeopardy, which really isn't his sketch. He's in it, but it's not really his bit. They don't need him to do it.
Well, and Josh, I think it's interesting that you point out this sketch with regard to Norm being like the notable straight man in it, and that he normally played, if he was in sketches, he played more goofy characters. And like you said, there are a couple of impressions, but with the like the psychologist sketch that we'll talk about later, that feels like this feels like a modicum different. Like it really, and I think it gets to what Isaiah was saying, is it just feels like, to me at least, there's not a whole lot of differentiation between Norm as a straight man and Norm playing the comedic character when he's not doing an impression.
Yeah. And
I think it's interesting how Norm Macdonald is perceived in these sketches, because in an article in The Atlantic that I will find the name of, the author describes him as being a great actor who chooses to do this one kind of bit. And I'm not so sure about that because I don't know what I'm basing Norm being a great actor on. He's funny.
I don't know if I would call him a great actor either. Like,
Yeah.
I think he has range. I think he chooses to kind of not take that road because he's in a pursuit of a pure form of comedy. So he's not going to,
I honestly think that he's one of those comedians that only did acting to pay the bills. Like, if he probably would have been perfectly happy just being a road comic, but other opportunities came up. Like, how do you say no to SNL? How do you say no to a sitcom? How do you say no to
dirty work?
A movie, with like Dirty Work, where I think there's one with Danny DeVito, like
twins.
It's like, yeah, I think he probably would have preferred just to be a stand-up comic and done 3 nights at a club every week,
and then show up for late nights. I think, when I got to, preparing for this episode, I was watching all the clips everybody was posting. A lot of it came from late night, from him getting up there, doing his bit and then sitting with the host and just joshing around these guys.
Yeah, him on Conan or Letterman is like just as important to his like legacy as any other work he's ever done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I would 1,000% agree.
Hey, I'm AJ Schrader, and I believe everyone has a story worth telling, and also that I should potentially profit off of their stories. That's why I started the podcast I Wrote You a Pilot, where each episode I talk to a not yet famous person about their television interest, and then make them read a television pilot I hastily wrote for them with the hopes of catching the eyes of the president of television. It's available on most major podcast platforms, or you can find out more directly at iwroteyouapilot.podbean.com.
Isaiah, what Norm Macdonald stuff jumped out at you?
It's definitely hard to pick one. I think you guys shared some really great stuff. I even watched the old episode that he was on with Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, just trying to see like what jumps out at me as something that's worth talking about. And I think at the end of the day, you gotta look at the Celebrity Jeopardy stuff with the Burt Reynolds.
Burt Reynolds.
That's not my name.
Okay. Turd Ferguson.
Yeah, what do you want?
You buzzed in.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, well, that's your opinion.
I hate my job. The answer was mustard. Mustard is made from mustard seeds. Mr. Reynolds, it's still your board.
Yeah, well, why don't you give me 8 tit for 200?
I don't even want to say it's a good impression because I don't think it is. But like his tone that he took in that sketch and the gum and the chewing and the way he just kind of acts and like the Turd Ferguson jokes and like that sketch already kind of had a system going. And then you kind of add him to it and he helps keep the energy up so that they can go back. And I think when you write a sketch like Celebrity Jeopardy, that's a parody of a show, and you have such strong dynamics between two characters, it's I would almost say like the third character in most of those sketches, you don't quote, you don't remember anything about them,
You don't remember Jimmy Fallon doing French Stewart in that sketch? I feel like that's very memorable.
I'm saying most of them. Yeah. Most of them, you don't remember the third person.
But if I remember correctly, so the one, like the big one that everyone remembers with Turd Ferguson and the oversized foam hat, like was when he hosted, when he came back.
Oh, really?
I remember him doing Burt Reynolds as like the main troublemaker on the Jeopardy sketches before he was fired. And then it transitions to Sean Connery being the weirdo. Like, I'd have to go digging, but I'm pretty sure he did it at least once or twice, like as a cast member. It's just that this one was the best. Like the one that he hosted was the best one.
I would like to see if there's a supercut of all his appearances on there. But I just like the tone and the approach that he takes in playing a character because it is, you're going to talk about the cold open heat with Oprah and Marv Albert, where like he kind of doesn't play himself normally. His tone is different, his stance, the way he kind of gets through the words are different, and I like that. And I like that. That to me was funny as a kid, and it's still funny to me now as an adult. Like, just it's almost physical comedy, and just the kind of the way he kind of leans into his questions and answers, and
playing with his cuffs and like just chewing gum, looking off into the distance. Like,
it's a good bit. It's a good bit, and I will probably still find it funny 20 years from now.
Like we'll all be alive in 20 years. Yeah, I think that the Celebrity Jeopardy bit it's timeless for sure, and it holds up in a very specific way, mostly because he's kind of he's not, as you said, Isaiah, he's not being himself, but he's not being Burt Reynolds.
No, not at all. Not at all.
He's just being a weird dude, like couched in the idea of Burt Reynolds. Burt Reynolds is like he's a bit odd, but like Burt Reynolds is certainly, if you're trying to like parody what people think of as Burt Reynolds, is like a cool customer. Like,
it's that idea where certain SNL impressionists like really want to like be as accurate as possible and make you truly believe that they're that person. Like Daryl Hammond did it, like talked about how much he studied Bill Clinton to try to like get it down like completely, where Dana Carvey was like, yeah, I'm George Bush. I'm going to hit this little nugget and just play with it and like become this character George Bush instead of wanting to be as close as possible to, the original George Bush.
Yeah.
And I think Norm's definitely more in that camp of like, oh, I'll take some weird little foible I've seen once and create a full character out of that instead.
And as someone who's not a good actor,
you're wrong, but okay, disagree.
I find value in someone saying, all right, I'll play X character, impersonate this person, but I'm going to do it my own way, and then like lean into it. So I think there's one of the things I want to get better at is doing characters, coming up with characters and performing as that character. And, in Bad Medicines, we don't do a lot of impersonations. There's not a lot of people that can do voices, that can mimic stuff. And, that's a weak point, and I would love to get better at that. And I think maybe one of the approaches is doing that, being like, all right, you are X, but you're going to only be X in one way. And then the rest of it, you're going to make up and escalate on it in any other form if you want to do it, whether it's physical humor or, you got a prop gum in your mouth and you're just going to, chew and make eyes with the audience. But,
I thought you said you have a prop gun in your mouth, and I was like, boy, what sketch is that?
Gum. 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 Oh. We have not written that sketch yet. I don't think. No. I mean, there may be one sketch, maybe one joke. That
I'm ready for that because I'm ready to show off my timely Dave Matthews impression. Dave Matthews sings like his tongue is too big for his mouth. You cannot quit me so quickly. Do, 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 do.
I thought you said he sings like he has a gun in his mouth. And I was like,
yeah, he does sing going? Like you cannot quit me so quickly.
First times can be awkward for everything, including comedy. So why not look back at a comedy writer's first attempt at making an audience laugh? From Philly Sketchfest, have a listen to My First Sketch, the podcast introducing you to sketch comedians from around the world, starting with their first sketch. Hosted by me, Josh Higham, we'll explore how a writer got started, what shaped their sense of humor, and where they go from here. Check out My First Sketch at myfirstsketch.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
We've mentioned the Marv Albert sketch a couple times. I want to mention it. It's him playing Marv Albert, the sportscaster who had just been in there was controversy around Marv Albert because he bit a woman allegedly during sex.
I think since he went to jail, you don't have to say allegedly anymore.
That's fair. Yes. Fair enough. I couldn't remember that. So thank you for reminding me. Yeah. So he bit a woman non-consensually. Consensual biting, you do you, listeners. But non-consensually, don't do it. And so he's playing Marv Albert with Tim Meadows playing Oprah.
So, Marv, you wrote this book and you're here to talk about it.
Well, that's right, Oprah, and I'd really like to thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Well, forget about it, because it ain't gonna happen. Now, let's talk about you and them choppers of yours. You likes to get freaky.
Well, yes!
Now, honey, I heard that you like to wear women's panties.
Yes!
Mm-hmm. You even wore nipple clamps?
Yes!
Mm-hmm. You ever use an ass bracelet?
Yes! And it hurts!
You go, girl. How about the squirmy rooter?
Oh, my God, yes!
I am scared of you, honey.
And so he's playing Marv Albert with Tim Meadows playing Oprah. And what actually grabbed me about this sketch is because I thought he was doing a pretty good impression of Marv Albert.
He was.
And I didn't
totally.
think but the audience didn't seem to get it. Or maybe they weren't interested in it, but he was doing really pitch perfect the Marv Albert famous yes.
Very,
his catchphrase.
NBA Jam. It was like all NBA Jam sound effects. He's on fire.
Yeah. It's actually something I've written into a sketch that we've done that, again, the audience didn't get. So maybe, especially now, probably Marv Albert impressions aren't terribly timely. But it stood out to me so much because I was like, again, not thinking of Norm Macdonald as a strong actor, but thinking he's nailing this impression, but it's not getting a good reaction. I don't quite know why, but the audience wasn't picking up on it, or they weren't interested in that character. I don't know. I thought it was interesting.
It's weird because that particular sketch is a cold open.
Right.
And it is such a bizarre choice to open the show with. Which I think personally that might be my response to why the audience isn't as into it. But yeah, it is a great impression, but why do you lead off with that?
So it's a 1 a.m. sketch that they did as a cold open, you think?
It feels to me like they couldn't figure out how to get out of it on a button, so let's just throw Live with New York and just throw it up front.
Yeah.
Which very well possibly could be the way. But I feel like a Marv Albert impression, if you've watched basketball, is relatively easy.
Yeah.
With the yes, all of his, catchphrases and whatnot that he's memorable for. This is such a weird, because I do remember watching the sketch when this first happened, and I was 11 or 12. And with this and all the stuff that was happening with Clinton, the whole idea of sexual politics made at that age, I was not ready for.
Sure. Yeah.
So, Norm, Marv Albert, who just seemed like such a straight-laced dude going to jail for, I don't know what the actual charges were, but ended up going to jail for that. That's wild.
Yeah.
I mean, I like the tone that they were just asking him questions and he was just hitting the yes. And it was getting worse and worse. It's the escalation of the game was just cracking me up. It was perfectly built. So it is a very funny sketch. It just was just I don't know if this is the one you lead the show off with.
Sure.
Even if you were to do it, somehow if you were able to do it today in today's world, and you did
the R. Kelly sketch. It's like the R. Kelly sketch.
Yeah, you had the right characters in, you were doing a bit. I don't think you open your show with this unless you really want to divide the audience immediately and say, well, if this doesn't offend you, you're with us for the rest of the show. It's almost it's not a law. It's straight heater down the middle.
And I have no memory of who hosted that episode and what would have come after that.
Yeah, that would be very interesting to do whoever's doing the monologue after that.
What do you have to recover from?
Yeah,
with this very cold audience.
So the host, Wikipedia, I could be wrong, says it was Sylvester Stallone who hosted the episode where they opened with
Oh,
the
it was that
Marvel
episode?
sketch. I think so. I did a quick Google date, the date, SNL date, and that's what came up with Jamiroquai as
That episode
Jamiroquai, come on.
Jamiroquai. I'm sorry.
Come on.
I'm reading it, man.
That episode has a really funny sketch where Norm Macdonald's in a car accident and Sylvester Stallone tries to save him, but he just keeps rattling off all of Sylvester Stallone's bad movies. Like, I enjoy it.
I know EK wanted to talk about this, so I think it's worth bringing up. What is your thoughts on the Moth Joke, which I think is, if you were going to show someone one joke or one bit from Norm to who has no idea who he is, to kind of give them the idea of this is Norm, this is what he does. I think the Moth Joke is the joke you share. What do you guys think of that one?
I completely agree that it is like a tentpole joke for him, or a signpost joke for this is what Norm Macdonald is, and I think it is a stupid fucking joke that I do not care for.
Well, to me, I was thinking about this when she sent out the email about it. I was like, the Moth Joke is basically the Aristocrats, where
exactly what it is.
Where you have the setup, you have the punchline 5 minutes later, and you just do whatever you want in those 5 minutes, which is kind of what it's kind of what you need when you just need to fill 5 minutes on a talk show, someone that can just say just craziness for that's why he is almost this epic, memorable guy on Conan and Letterman. You just go off for 5 minutes. You have Norm, you have 5 minutes that you don't have to worry about.
Right. I think for me, I know I was quite flippant when I just said I think it's just because I said this, I can't remember if I said this before we started recording or after we started recording, but it just seems like, and this is the whole point, it seems like it should build to something more interesting than, well, the light was on, which, spoiler alert, is the punchline to that 6 minute joke.
It shouldn't because that's how great it is, because you get so invested in what's going on. You're tracking all these details, waiting to get to something that's, clever and strings them all together, and then it's not. That's the whole meal.
As someone who knows who Norm Macdonald is, didn't you know that was coming?
In a sense, yeah. It's kind of like a Mitch Hedberg's joke where there's a twist to the joke, and so you're waiting for the twist.
But at least you know that you at least the twist isn't going to be a lame punchline. I think that's my thing, is that the twist with Norm Macdonald always comes down to, or not always, but often comes down to a basic punchline. When he was on the roast of Bob Saget, which was a big thing for him.
Yeah.
And he gets up and he does these jokes oh, you have a beautiful face like a flower. Cauliflower.
See, okay, so I'm with Isaiah here. I love the roast thing because it is within the situation that he's in, he's doing something so vastly different than everyone else. And if you watch that particular roast, he doesn't care to be there. He is sitting up there on the stage reading the paper, and anytime someone talks about him, he just looks up from the paper why are you guys talking about me? And then those jokes are I remember when I first watched it, I thought that was anti-humor, but the jokes of them are so good to me.
But it's also the delivery. It's not just the joke. It's the way he delivered. I mean, Gilbert Gottfried delivering those jokes, they're going to hit differently. It's just, you can just, and also I would say them cutting away to the reactions of the comedians watching him do this, and they're just in awe that he is taking this swing
Yeah, Bob
just
Saget absolutely loves what's happening.
They love it. They're loving it. Yeah, they're like, oh my god, I can't believe he's going for it, man. He's gonna make the 700 twist land joke, and he's going for it, and it's like, it's delicious.
I don't think the point that I'm trying to make, and I don't think I'm doing a good enough job at this. So let me try and reframe it.
You hate Norm Macdonald, and
no, I am not trying to make the point that any individual instance of these things are not good and that he's not subverting the thing. It's that when viewed in retrospect and as a body of work, it seems like it comes back to the same thing every time. And so it's not that is not a virtuoso performance at a roast. It's that ultimately the Moth Joke is the same thing.
If all you're doing is grown punchlines, I guess if you're expecting it to come, I could see how that gets old.
Well, I think I mentioned this to you a couple weeks ago when we were hanging out, Isaiah, that like comedy is math and magic. There's a formula, and then there's some kind of like subversion or sleight of hand. It always boils down. There's always a formula to a joke. Like, if you teach comedy, you're teaching formulas of
100%.
fish out of water characters, like, and it's dumb for us to think it is like that. We're not like just straight on like Jeopardy sketch is a formula. Funny titles to the categories. You have 4 different questions. Make some kind of pun, like it's absurd to think, it's hard to say that like comedy can be at this high art where like SNL for 40 something years has literally just been copy and pasting a format and then inserting joke here, inserting joke here. Like, but that bit of magic, that bit of like subterfuge and sleight of hand, that's why the Moth Joke works. You don't expect necessarily, we might have seeing it that whatever this punchline is going to be ridiculous, like is going to be, something that my nephew would tell me.
Yeah.
But the 5 minutes that he does it of, telling this whole story along the way, oh, maybe it won't be. And then that boom of, oh, silly punchline. Oh, he got us again. Like,
yeah. No, it's very true. And I think that is a good point, is that not everyone is thinking about every instance as like the whole of his art. This is a funny joke, and the setup is funny. And as you said, the Aristocrats work sometimes. It doesn't always work, but the Aristocrats work sometimes.
The question I have is, he was very vocal about his opinions in stand up on and off the stage. And who he supported and who he backed and his thoughts on the Me Too movement and things like that. Very similar to Chappelle, where this is what I think, says something, it's like, whoa, what are you doing? So I could see people saying, like, why are you, like you said earlier, why are we talking about Norm? Why are we singling him out? Other comedians have passed away. We've never done this before. Why Norm? Like, can you separate the man's point of views from his comedy, from his act? Is that, justified? Is there a line to where that, if you cross this line, there's nothing, you're just a lost cause, or because he's a human being, he's going to have faults, but that shouldn't just be the hard cutoff.
In literary criticism, this is called the death of the author. And it is a it's modern or postmodern idea that basically suggests the artist is entirely separate from the art. And it's a good question. Is the artist entirely separate from the art? I think with stand-ups, it is particularly difficult to separate the artist from the art, because the nature of the art is inherently presenting a version of yourself. Not always, but 95% of the time, it's a version of yourself that you're presenting on stage. He had some, Norm Macdonald certainly in the Me Too era had some bad takes. that did not age well. Notably saying, with regard to Roseanne Barr, who gave him his first job writing on Roseanne, and Louis C.K. basically saying they did one thing and then like their whole career was ruined in a day, and that didn't happen to the victims. He said that. He walked it back afterwards, but that's a really unnuanced take about that. I don't think that means we can't appreciate the art that Norm Macdonald made, but I think it's a necessary part of the conversation about Norm Macdonald.
Yeah, shortly after Norm passed away, Conan did a episode of his podcast with Andy Richter, and I think I forget his name, but the guy that books the stand-ups on the show.
Yeah.
And they talked about one of his other appearances on Conan's show, which I think was the TBS show at this point, where he did another one of his 6-minute long jokes about a Swedish Hungarian, I think it is, or German Hungarian or something, because Andy Richter volunteers that his cultural heritage is Swedish Hungarian, and it's basically like a 6-minute long gay joke, and Andy talks about having to sit there, and it is kind of funny, but it's still a gay joke, and he's uncomfortable. Like he says he's uncomfortable kind of being the part of the process of making fun of a gay person, but being attached to it, and how he had to reconcile that. And I wish I had gone back and listened to the episode to remember what Andy fully says about it. But he was like, yeah, he's a funny guy, but sometimes his jokes aren't the best for what year we're in. Norm seems to be very stuck in maybe a time warp of 60s, 70s, 80s, something that's nothing that we have to deal with as an audience. Comedy in 2021 is entirely different than comedy in the 50s or 60s.
All right. Well, let's talk. I think we're kind of getting to the end of things, but I do think we should talk about if Norm Macdonald is anti-humor. And I've already
define it.
Anti-humor is funny. It is humor that is funny because it is explicitly designed to not be funny. It is often basic or subversive in that way. I think a good example is Andy Kaufman, who's probably the father of anti-humor, getting up on stage and reading The Great Gatsby. That was the whole bit. And people sat and watched and they left. Was it funny? Probably at first, and then probably again a little bit later. And then it's a whole novel. I don't know. Are there any other things I should add to the definition of anti-humor? I should have looked it up. This is just me off the top of my head.
No, that was a good guess. I thought you were going to lead in Tim and Eric style.
I don't think Tim and Eric is anti-humor. I think it's surreal
Not
humor.
funny.
No. I think it's surreal.
Okay, that's fair.
I agree that I'm certainly not defending Tim and Eric. I'm not a big fan, but I wouldn't say it's anti-humor. I'd say it's surreal humor.
All right. That's good. I think it's a good definition. Josh, what do you think?
I don't think he's anti-humor. I think even as, we talk about the Moth Joke being like a 6-minute thing with a dumb punchline, with a childish punchline, I'll say it that way. There's still points in that story that he tells, in that story, that are funny. It's not like he's going back to the Moth's childhood and just I can't really call him anti-humor, especially when you're using Gatsby and Andy Kaufman as a point to that, especially now as I look at an Andy Kaufman painting staring at me. I think he's always trying to make people laugh. It's not just there to be for the experience that Andy Kaufman was looking for. Andy Kaufman was looking for any reaction. I think people that are doing Andy humor are looking for any to make people uncomfortable to the point where I don't think Norm was doing that.
I think that's a really good point.
I think he was always going for a laugh.
He was always going for a laugh, which is certainly a point against him being anti-humor. Definitely.
Maybe the occasional groan, but
but
always a laugh.
Right. Isaiah, what do you think?
I don't think Norm was trying to do anti-humor. I think he was literally trying to tell a joke in maybe a different way than people would mostly expect. I think he has this, everyman quality to him, and the way he delivers, and he wants to be approachable to the audience. And he's really great at getting the audience to follow along with what he's saying and to respond back to their, he can feed off of them very well. And I think when you're trying to do anti-humor, you don't care what the audience is doing. And I think he does care. I just looked up anti-humor on Wikipedia, and they do mention Andy Kaufman, but they also mention Norm Macdonald, even though they do state that he objected to being associated with anti-humor. Also on here, they put dad jokes up here. They put surreal humor. And the aristocrats are on here for some reason.
With Tom Green?
I could see that. But I do think he was actually trying to tell jokes. And that's one of the reasons why he's seen as being a comedian's comedian, because that's what he was doing.
I'll stand by my view of him as anti-humor, but Josh's point about him always trying to get a laugh does certainly challenge that in a meaningful way. Any final thoughts on Norm Macdonald before we never mention him again? No.
Go ahead, Josh.
The big arching thing with the surprise of his death, and apparently that he had been fighting cancer for the last 10 years. And looking back at some of the, for whatever reason, I got a couple, watching, some of the videos that we were talking about, my YouTube mentions were starting to say, Norm Macdonald playing poker or Norm Macdonald doing this. And he is looking older and kind of unwell in some of those videos. There's a part of me that wishes that we knew as a public, that as, comedy fans, that we knew something was up. Because similar to Chadwick Boseman, when, someone dies that suddenly, despite suffering for so long, you kind of wish that you were able to celebrate that person with them still here. The whole idea that Chadwick, everyone thought that he was going to win the Oscar the year after he died. And when he didn't, everyone was up in arms of, oh my gosh, well, we could have celebrated him more then. We could have celebrated Norm just as much. Comedy Central could have done something if we knew that he was sick, or, whatever. I'm not going to say fundraising, because that's
yeah.
But
that the idea of give the roses to the people before they go.
Yeah.
Sure.
I think is a big thing with Norm, unfortunately.
I would say the same thing. It was nice to see friends of mine who I didn't know they were big Norm fans, that posted pictures of getting his autograph, meeting him in person and waiting in line and getting a picture with him. A lot of people posted stuff when he passed, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this. It's it seemed like it hit everybody, and most people were like, him, Norm, what? And I do think that if you do have a comedian that you like, actor that you like, and you have an opportunity to go see them live, just go do it. And, write them fan letters, just do it, because
unless they're playing Ram's Head live in Baltimore in 2012, then don't do it. Or you get your money back, so it's not so bad.
I'm so curious about that show now.
Yeah, I'll reach out to Ben and find out what was so bad about it.
If you get Ben to record the story on over a voicemail or something, I'll add it to the end of the show.
All right, I'll talk to him.
Just his explanation of what happened, because Ben's a great storyteller. I just feel I too wish celebrities. This is a weird thing to say, because it is a private matter. You can do whatever you want. But I wish he was hey guys, so and so's stepping down. He's not doing too well. You should give them their flowers now. Don't wait until they're dead.
Well, and he came out on the other side of it, but it's a bit like the Mark Hoppus thing. He was very upfront about the cancer he was experiencing. And it kind of allowed people to really, talk about how shitty it was, but kind of talk about how great a bass player, a great creative force he was for 3 decades now.
And honestly, like Norm, as far as I know, Norm still worked consistently the entire time. So it wasn't like he went away. Yeah, whatever his video show, his Netflix, I think he had a Netflix talk show, a podcast. Like he was still constantly moving, even though it, might not have been as high profile as Saturday Night Live, but like he never went away fully.
No, certainly not. Well, retrospective on Norm Macdonald. He was a great comedian, polarizing comedian. But to quote the AV Club in their obituary, Norm Macdonald was a comedian who told jokes, damn it. So thank you so much to Josh Higham for being on the show today. We loved having you. We always love having you. Thank you to Isaiah Hedden. And I'm Andy Weld. Thanks for listening to Sketch Nerds.
This episode was produced by Isaiah Hedden and recorded in Washington, D.C. The closing music tracks were provided by SoundtrackForEverything.com. All clips in this podcast were used in compliance with the U.S. Copyrights Act Fair Use Exemption for criticism and commentary. The Sketch Nerds podcast is brought to you by the sketch comedy group Bad Medicine, DC's best sketch comedy about the worst of humanity. For showtimes, videos, and funny t-shirts, please visit badmedicinecomedy.com.